However, by 1878, the situation had escalated, and for the first time, the organization faced the prospects of no assistance from the village board. During this time, the public library, which had essentially been a library that was connected with the public schools, the public library started to gain more support and more acceptance in the community, and the village fathers were feeling more and more pressure to give the kind of support to the public library that they had been giving to the Ladies' Library Association. And so in a set of minutes from 1878, the organization, quote, decides to either build ourselves a home or give up the ghost. You know, they were ready to go. The membership consulted with the male business elite of the community to determine what to do. And this is what I just love about these women. Most of the time in reading the minutes, I always have a sense that these women know exactly what they want to do. And then they will consult with somebody like Hezekiah Wells or James Stone and basically get the men to say, well, this is what we should do, and then they enthusiastically agree. So these women formed a committee to help them with the building goal, and they initiated a meeting with the men of the community, and they asked them to essentially cooperate with them and assist in any way, you know, needed, and the men were agreeable. The Kalamazoo organization had always been very adept at fundraising, and as I said, they were also wonderful politicians, and always gaining the support of the community, especially the support of businessmen. And one set of minutes that I find particularly intriguing, and I think this speaks to the status of women during this time, the president empowers, quote, each lady to consider herself a member of the community and interview gentlemen to find out what to do to raise the necessary funds, end quote. So the association spent most of 1878 on fundraising activities that required the cooperation and efforts of both men and women. The women raised funds through projects ranging from an operetta presented by the association. They also had a quilt raffle. At this point, Charity Potter was the president of the organization, and her husband, Alan Potter, was a former mayor. And Alan Potter would collect the most money. They generally left the direct solicitation of funds to their husbands, and Alan Potter managed to bring in $425. But they were, you know, essentially acting, you know, really within the proper realm of, you know, what was considered, you know, middle and upper class women's societal roles at that time. Over the years, though, the women had taken some novel means to raise funds, and longtime treasurer Ruth Webster was particularly astute, and she had been one of the longest advocates for a building fund. And unlike other organizations, under the guidance and I think Mrs. Webster's motivations, the organization essentially lent funds at interest to grow their building fund. And this is something she had worked on for years. And this had happened very early. One of the earliest references I've found to this is that as early as 1853, they were loaning funds to Professor James Stone at 10% interest, which seems a little high, but anyway, these women were lenders. From what I can tell, they were primarily lending to their husbands. And so it's interesting, there are a couple of historians, historian and a geographer at Western, you may know Dr. Hodak and Dr. Heller, and we've had some very interesting conversations because they are interested in how farmers would get money, and they found that some of these wealthier farm women were also engaging in some of these private loan practices, and we've actually looked at some of the membership of the various ladies' library associations and some of these women who were extending loans, and we found a little bit of overlap, and I don't know what that means yet, but I do think it's kind of an interesting thing that, you know, think about 19th century women individually or as an organization, you know, moving into the financial markets. The women worked at all phases of planning and worked with the contractors during the building and planning phase. And they found an architect, Henry Gay, out of Chicago, and authorized Bush and Patterson to construct the building in accordance with Henry Gay's plans and specifications. And I'll talk a little bit more about Henry Gay shortly. Bush and Patterson, of course, they built numerous buildings in the Kalamazoo area. They were longtime building contractors and responsible for any number of downtown buildings. The decision to go with Henry Gay I find a little more interesting, and I'll get into that. Essentially, the offer of free land finally dictated the location of the building. And the lot, which this is an 1874 bird's eye view map of Kalamazoo, it shows the approximate location. And to some degree, some earlier concerns that the organization had over the location may have been, not unfounded. The building was located adjacent to the business, governmental, and religious center of the village. And as you can see from this map, it does contain, there's Bronson Park to the left, but as you look to the top of that, you see the commercial district, although it's very nicely bounded toward the bottom by a lot of residential architecture, which of course today, that is not the case. And just north of the building was the home of Judge Hezekiah Wells, the man whom they consulted at many, ventures or points during the whole process. One of the things that we have in the archives on deposit from the Ladies Library Association, we actually have the actual 1878 drawings. And they're absolutely beautiful pieces of artwork. And the drawings, of course, were done by Henry Lord Gay out of Chicago. He was an architect, rather young man. He was born 1844 in Baltimore, Maryland. He had studied for 4 years at New Haven, Connecticut, went to Chicago, and by the late 1860s was a practicing architect. And from what I can tell, his first major commission was a church described as an auditorium-style church, and he had completed the plans for this in 1868. And this is another one of the plans that shows the main floor of the Ladies Library Association building. Just prior to developing these plans, he had been involved in a very controversial accident. May 11th, 1877, a courthouse designed by him in Winnebago County, Rockford, Illinois, had collapsed during construction. And I've read several different accounts, and it appears that probably about 8 men were killed, probably about a dozen more were injured, various levels of injury. And the papers, and this made the news, the Chicago News, New York Times, the newspapers were rather brutal and really laid the blame on him, saying that the design was poorly executed. And there actually was a, let's look at my notes here. They had a coroner's jury, and they found Henry Gay guilty, and one of the terms they used was he was imprudent, but they also laid blame on the Board of Supervisors, specifically for hiring an incompetent architect.